The crown was gone. Celeste Carmichael stood in the center of the Malkavian vault, her chest heaving, her flashlight cutting through the suffocating darkness of a room that should have been impenetrable. 3 layers of blood-sealed locks. An ancient ward carved into the stone floor. A chamber buried 40 feet beneath the streets of Vienna, accessible only through a passage hidden behind the north wing of the Malkavian estate. And yet the obsidian pedestal in the center of the room stood bare, the indentation where the Dawnbreaker Crown had rested for 3 centuries, nothing but empty shadow. Her father had warned her. Before he died, before the fever took him and left her the last human heir to a bloodline that had served the Malkavian court for 6 generations, her father had pressed his dry, trembling hand against her cheek and said, "They will come for it, Celeste, and when they do, you will be the only one who can stop them. Not because you are powerful, because you are the only one they will not see coming." She had not understood then. She understood now. Because the Dawnbreaker Crown was not simply a royal ornament. It was the physical embodiment of the ancient vow between the Malkavian bloodline and the old covenant of the Duskborn. Whoever wore it held dominion over the accord that kept the fragile peace between the 13 vampire courts of Europe. Without it, Emeric Malkavian had no legal authority to enforce the blood law that prevented open warfare. Without it, 3 centuries of careful, brutal diplomacy dissolved into nothing, and without the blood law, the first court to arm itself fully could declare open season on every human city within their territory: Vienna, Prague, Budapest, Milan. Millions of lives. She had approximately 4 hours before Emeric returned from the emergency summit in Budapest, where his rivals had almost certainly engineered this theft to draw him away deliberately. She had 4 hours to find the crown before he walked into this vault and discovered not just its absence, but the full catastrophic weight of what that absence meant. Celeste pressed her palm flat against the cold stone floor beside the pedestal and breathed. There was a smell, faint but unmistakable to anyone trained the way she had been trained. Beneath the iron-rich mineral scent of the vault, beneath the residual charge of broken wards, there was something floral and wrong. Nightshade oil. Specifically, the kind distilled by the Vordain court's alchemists, recognizable by the synthetic undertone that no natural plant produced. She had smelled it twice before, once on a dead courier outside Prague, and once on the gloves of a Vordain envoy who had attended the autumn conclave. The Vordain court, Celeste was already moving. She took the passage back up through the estate, her footsteps unsensed on the stone, her mind cycling through everything she knew about the Vordain. Their lord was Cassius Vordain, a vampire who had waited 400 years to dismantle the Malkavian dynasty. He was patient, he was meticulous, and he had people everywhere. But he also had one reliable flaw, one consistent vanity that her father had documented carefully in the old journals she had read 100 times. Cassius Vordain never destroyed what he stole, he displayed it. He wanted to be seen holding power, not simply holding it. Which meant the crown was not yet destroyed or hidden beyond reach. It was somewhere visible to the right audience. It was somewhere Cassius Vordain intended to use. She surfaced into the cold Vienna night through a service door in the alley behind the estate, pulling her dark coat tight against the November air, already reaching for her phone to pull up the network of informants her father had left her. She had inherited exactly 2 things from him: the loyalty of those informants and the word that opened doors in the hidden world of vampire courts. She intended to use both before dawn. Her contact, a sharp-eyed woman named Lena, who ran a high-end antiquities brokerage on the 4th floor of a building overlooking the Ringstrasse, answered on the 2nd ring. "Celeste, it is late. I need Vordain movement in the last 12 hours. Entry points, transit routes, safe houses. I know they have been in Vienna, and I know they left with something they should not have." A pause. The sound of a chair moving. Then, quietly, there was a transport. Private car. Diplomatic plates registered to a Luxembourg shell company. Left the 8th district at 11:47 and was tracked heading northeast on the A22. Northeast on the A22, Bratislava. The old Vordain satellite house in Bratislava, Celeste said, already thinking. It has been dormant for 6 years. Not dormant, Lena said carefully. Renovated, quietly, very, very quietly. It has been active for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. The planning window matched perfectly. This had not been improvised. This had been constructed around the summit schedule, around Emeric's forced absence, around the specific vulnerability of the vault during the hours when the Blood Ward required its monthly dormancy cycle for maintenance. Someone had given Cassius Vordain the maintenance schedule, someone inside the Malkavian court. Celeste said, "I need a car and whatever you have on the interior layout of that house, Celeste." Lena's voice shifted, carrying the particular weight of someone trying to be careful. "What you are describing, going into Vordain territory alone, without Malkavian escort, without authorization from the king himself, that is not a retrieval mission. That is a suicide note written in advance. My father served this court for 30 years. Celeste said quietly, "He died serving it. I am not going to let it fall apart because I was too careful to act when acting was what was needed." Another pause then. "The car will be downstairs in 8 minutes. I am sending the layout to your encrypted line." Celeste looked up at the Vienna sky, the orange glow of the city against low clouds, the strange beautiful indifference of a modern metropolis that had no idea what breathed beneath its streets. "Thank you, Lena." She was already walking. The drive to Bratislava took her through the cold dark of early morning, the highway cutting through flat land between the two cities, the Danube's somewhere to her right invisible in the darkness. She used the 90 minutes to study Lena's floor plans, to map entry points, to identify the probable location of whatever displaced space Cassius Vordain would use for something as significant as the Dawnbreaker Crown. There was a great hall on the second floor. Original stonework, according to the architectural records Lena had dug from permit filings. It had been the first space renovated, of course. Cassius would want somewhere grand to stand when he announced to his inner circle that the balance of power had shifted. He would not wait long. He would call a gathering, probably within 24 hours of the theft, to begin building his political momentum before Emeric could respond. She had to move before that gathering happened. She parked 2 streets from the house and went the rest of the way on foot, moving through the back lanes of the old quarter, past shuttered restaurants and the cold glow of streetlights. The Vordain satellite house was a narrow 3-story building pressed between 2 larger structures, its facade unremarkable, its windows dark. But there were guards on the street, 2 of them, standing with the particular stillness that told her immediately they were not human. Vampires, young ones probably, given the assignment. Not ancients. Ancients did not stand guard duty on a cold Bratislava street. She had planned for this. The service lane at the back of the building was unguarded, which was either an oversight or a trap. She moved along the wall slowly, testing for wards with the copper and Rowan detection tool her father had built for her when she was 19, a simple device, a length of copper wire twisted around a Rowan branch, but one that reacted visibly to any active blood ward within 4 meters. It stayed still, no wards on the service entrance, oversight then, or arrogance. The Vordain had not considered that someone would come so quickly. The lock on the service door was mechanical, which almost made her laugh. She had it open in 40 seconds. Inside, the house smelled of old stone and fresh wood polish, the combination of ancient architecture recently restored. She moved up a back staircase, counting floors, orienting herself against the layout she had memorized. The great hall was accessed through double doors at the east end of the 2nd floor. As she approached, she could hear voices, low, deliberate. The kind of conversation conducted by people who believed themselves completely secure. She pressed herself against the wall beside the double doors and listened. A voice she did not recognize, male, older, with the particular cadence of someone who had been speaking formally for centuries. The gathering is set for tomorrow evening. 12 court representatives have confirmed. When they see the crown in your hands, the declaration will be unanimous. And then a second voice, one she did recognize from a conclave 2 years ago, smooth and precise and carrying the faint antiquated accent of a bloodline that predated the French Revolution. Cassius Vordain, unanimous, yes. But we must be prepared for Malkavian retaliation. Emeric will not accept this quietly. Emeric Malkavian will have no legal standing once the accord is dissolved. Without the crown, the blood law is unenforceable. He becomes simply another ancient with a territory and a temper. "Do not underestimate him," Cassius said, and there was something in his tone that suggested genuine caution. Genuine respect, even. For an enemy he had spent centuries trying to outmaneuver. He did not hold this continent's peace for 300 years by being manageable. Celeste pressed her eyes shut briefly, organizing what she had heard. The gathering was tomorrow. She had tonight, and from the sound of the voices, there were at minimum 2 people in that room, likely more. She needed to see the crown before she could know how to move it. She needed a distraction. She pulled out her phone and sent a single message to Lena. 3 words, a prearranged signal they had discussed only once, years ago, when her father was still alive and had insisted on building contingency systems into every relationship Celeste maintained. The message was, "Ring the bell." 17 seconds later, the fire alarm in the building began to sound. Not a coincidence. Lena had access to the city's emergency monitoring network through a contract Celeste's father had negotiated in exchange for information that had once saved a senior city official from a very public scandal. One call to the right number, and the alarm in a specific building could be triggered remotely. The voices inside the Great Hall shifted immediately. Movement. The sound of a door opening on the far side of the room. She heard Cassia say sharply, "Check the south stairwell," and then another voice, saying something about the alarm system having been recently tested, the exchange rapid and distracted. She pushed the double doors open and walked in. The Great Hall was exactly as the floor plan had shown. High ceilings, restored stonework, iron sconces holding electric bulbs designed to look like candles, a long table running the center, and there, on a raised platform at the far end, mounted on a stand of black iron, was the Dawnbreaker Crown. It was both smaller and more significant than she had imagined. A narrow band of black metal, unadorned except for a series of intricate engravings she recognized from her father's books as the original Covenant script, the language of the Old Accord. It did not glow. It did not radiate power in any obvious way. It looked like an artifact in a museum, but the air around it had a quality she could feel in her sternum, a low resonant pressure, ancient and absolute. There were 4 people in the room. 2 guards near the platform, 1 near the doors she had come through, and Cassius Vordain himself, standing to the left of the platform, already turning toward her with an expression that moved through surprise, recognition, and cold amusement in the span of a breath. "Celeste Carmichael," he said, not a question. A statement of recognition that told her immediately he knew exactly who she was, what she meant to the Malkavian court. "Your father's daughter. I should have anticipated this." "You should have," she agreed, keeping her voice level, her eyes moving between the guards and the crown. The guard near the doors she had entered was closest to her. The 2 near the platform were spreading apart. Cassius was not moving yet, which meant he was thinking, which meant she had a few seconds of non-action to exploit. She pulled the compact she wore on her right wrist, a specialized device her father had designed. A compressed air pulse that delivered a burst of refined sunlight concentrate, synthesized UV radiation packed into a container charge. It was not lethal to an ancient. It was extremely painful and temporarily debilitating, and against younger vampires, it would buy her approximately 30 seconds per charge. She had 3 charges loaded. She fired the first at the guard by the doors before he could move, and the burst hit him full in the chest. He screamed and went down hard. She was already running toward the platform. The 2 guards near the crown moved to intercept, and she fired the second charge at the one on her left, catching him across the face and shoulder, sending him reeling into the wall. The one on her right reached her, and she spun, letting his grip close on her coat instead of her arm, shrugging the coat off and ducking under his reach. Crossing the last few feet to the platform in a dead sprint, her hand closed around the Dawnbreaker Crown. The resonance she had felt from across the room became immediately intense at contact, a deep harmonic vibration that ran up through her palm and into her bones. She did not stop to examine it. She shoved the crown into the interior bag she wore beneath her coat, sealed it, and turned to find Cassius Vordain standing directly between her and the doors. He was extraordinary looking, the way all ancient vampires were, white-skinned, white-haired, with eyes the color of deep amber, moving with a fluid precision that made human movement seem approximate by comparison. He was not angry. He was worse than angry. He was utterly composed, which meant he had already shifted from surprise to calculation. "You cannot take that crown out of this building," he said. "I have 23 people in this house, Celeste. Do not force me to use them against a human woman. If you damage or kill the last surviving heir of the Carmichael bloodline," she said, breathing hard, her mind already working the room, the exits, "you violate Section 4 of the Old Covenant, the same covenant you are claiming the right to dissolve. You cannot simultaneously invoke blood law as your justification and break it to stop me." Something shifted in his amber eyes, a recognition that she had used his own framework against him. "You have 2 seconds," she continued, "to decide whether you want to test that logic with the 12 court representatives who are due here tomorrow." She watched him, Emeric Malkavian, watched the cold precision of a 4-century-old mind work through the political consequences, and then, with the controlled grace of someone who knew that this was not over, but who also knew when a specific move was blocked, he stepped to the side. She walked through the doors. She made it down the back stairs and out the service door without being followed, which told her Cassius had made his choice. He would not pursue, not tonight. He would regroup, reassess, and come at this from another angle. But tonight, the crown was moving. She was running the last block to her car when her phone rang. She answered without looking at the screen. "I have it." A pause. A voice she had not expected. Not Lena, not any of her contacts. A voice she had heard at 2 conclaves and across a massive formal dining table, and once quietly at her father's funeral. A voice that was low and measured and carried the particular quality of someone who had learned to govern everything with precision, because every tone they produced had consequences. Emeric Malkavian said, "I know." She stopped walking. "I returned early," he said. "I knew from the moment the summit was called that it was a distraction. I found the vault. I tracked you from Vienna." A pause. "Where are you?" "Outside the Vordain satellite house in Bratislava," she said, and she was surprised by how steady her own voice was. "I have the crown. It is intact." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, something had changed in his voice, something beneath the control, beneath the regal command, something she could not fully name. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Stay where you are." He arrived in 11 minutes, which meant he had been far closer than Bratislava, possibly already in motion toward her. The car that pulled to the curb was black and long. And when the door opened and he stepped out into the orange glow of the street, she saw him fully for the first time, outside the formal context of the court. Emeric Malkavian was everything the court implied and more. Tall, spare, with the kind of physical stillness that came from an immortality spent in rooms where the wrong movement meant war. His skin was the particular white of old marble. His hair a silver white that fell past his collar. His eyes a shade of grey that shifted toward blue in certain lights and toward something darker in others. He wore contemporary clothes the way a king might wear, borrowed garments. Correctly, but with a fundamental disregard for their significance, because the authority was in him, not the fabric. He walked toward her, and his eyes moved over her with a rapid clinical assessment that was so obviously not clinical at all that she almost looked away. "You went into a Vordain holding alone," he said. "Without authorization, without backup, without telling anyone where you were going. I told Lena. Lena is an informant, not a guardian." He reached her and stopped, very close, and his eyes dropped to the bag against her chest. "You recovered it, yes." He put his hand out. Not demanding, not commanding, simply an open palm, and she understood that he was asking rather than taking. She reached into the bag and placed the crown in his hand, and watched something move across his face that she had never seen in any court setting. Something unguarded and real. A flash of relief so profound it bordered on anguish. He closed his fingers around it carefully. Then he looked at her. "Why?" he asked. It was the simplest question, and she understood exactly what he meant. Not how. Not the mechanics of the recovery. Why? Why had she done this? Why had she taken this risk? Why had she, a human woman, the last heir of a bloodline that had every reason to step back from the politics of the vampire world after her father's death, gone alone into enemy territory to recover something that was not technically hers to recover? She had prepared answers for a lot of questions in the hours between Vienna and Bratislava. She had not prepared for that one. "Because my father spent his life protecting this court," she said finally, "and I was not going to watch everything he cared about fall apart because I stayed home." Emeric looked at her for a long moment. The street was quiet around them, the cold November air carrying the smell of that Danube somewhere in the distance. His expression was composed again, the mask settling back, but something behind it had changed. She could see it in the way he held himself toward her. A fractional shift, almost imperceptible unless you were looking for it. "Get in the car," he said quietly. "We need to talk." The drive back to Vienna was long and mostly silent, but it was the kind of silence that had weight. The crown was in a secured case in the front of the vehicle. Celeste sat in the back with Emeric, not quite close enough to be touching, close enough that the warmth differential between a living human body and the cool stillness of an ancient vampire was a constant peripheral awareness. He spoke first, after 20 minutes. "Cassius let you walk out. I gave him a legal argument he could not publicly refute without undermining his own position." Emeric turned to look at her. "What argument?" she told him. She watched his expression as she laid out the logic, the section of the Old Covenant, the contradiction between Cassius's invocation of law and his willingness to harm a Carmichael heir to enforce his own agenda. Emeric listened the way she imagined. He listened to everything, with absolute attention and no performance of attention, simply the real thing. "Your father taught you that," he said when she finished. "He taught me everything that mattered," she said, a pause. Then, "He was the finest human ally this court has ever had. I told him so the last time I saw him." She looked out the window at the darkness moving past. "He never told me that. He would not have. He did not value flattery, even accurate flattery." A pause. "You are very like him. You barely know me." "I know what you did tonight," he said, "and I know what it cost. Not the physical risk, the other cost. The decision to keep serving a court that has taken more from your family than it has given." She turned back to look at him then, because there was something in his voice she had not expected. Not pity. Something more complex than pity. Something that held acknowledgement and weight and what felt very much like guilt. "The court did not take my father," she said. "A fever did." "A fever he contracted while traveling to Lyon on behalf of this court," Emeric said, and his jaw tightened slightly. "I do not pretend otherwise. I have been very aware of what your family has sacrificed. Your great-grandfather, your grandfather, your father, and now you, in a Vordain house in Bratislava at 3 a.m. I made my own choice tonight." "Yes," he said. "You did. That is what concerns me." She frowned. "It concerns you that I made my own choice?" "It concerns me," he said carefully, "that you made a choice of that magnitude alone, without the protection you deserved, without anyone knowing where you were. If Cassius had decided that legal consequences were worth the immediate political advantage of eliminating you, you would be dead, and I would be standing in that vault discovering 2 losses instead of 1. The weight of what he said settled over her. Not the danger itself, she had understood the danger, but the way he had said 2 losses, as if the crown and her were of comparable significance. She did not know how to respond to that, and so she said nothing. He seemed to understand because he did not press. He turned forward, watching the dark highway, and the silence between them shifted again, becoming something she had no precise word for. Less empty than before, they reached Vienna before dawn. The city was transitioning into its earliest morning state, delivery trucks on the outer roads, the first suggestions of light accumulating at the edge of the horizon to the east, still an hour away but present in the quality of the darkness. At the estate, the vault was resealed. The crown was returned to the pedestal. Emeric stood before it for a moment, with his back to her, very still, and she wondered what 3 centuries of responsibility felt like to carry, what it felt like to be the person on whom peace or war actually pivoted. He turned around. "There is still the matter of the traitor." She had not forgotten. Someone gave Cassius the maintenance schedule. "Yes, I have my own suspicions, but I require evidence." Suspicion without evidence in a court of this age is itself a political weapon. It would need to be handled very carefully. "I may be able to help with that," he looked at her. "You have already taken enough risk tonight, and I am still here," she said, "still capable of taking more. Who are your suspects?" A long moment passed. She could see him weighing something, a calculation she could not fully read, but which involved, she sensed, more than just the practical question of whether she was useful. "Come to my study," he said finally. "I will show you what I have." His study was on the upper floor of the estate, a room that managed to be both deeply old and entirely functional, walls of books interspersed with modern screens, a desk that was clearly centuries old alongside technology that was clearly this year. He spread documents across the desk and she stood beside him and they worked through it together, her reading, him providing context, both of them building the logic of the case. She noticed that he stood close, not inappropriately close, but closer than a formal working relationship required, as if the physical distance he would have maintained in a court setting had been set aside at some point in the night, without either of them deciding to set it aside. At 4 in the morning she found it. A minor scheduling document that had been accessed 3 weeks ago by a court member who should have had no reason to request it, a clerk named Aldrich who reported to one of the senior counselors. Alone it meant nothing, but cross-referenced with a financial transfer Lena had once flagged to her father 2 years ago as potentially suspicious, and with a travel record showing Aldrich in Luxembourg 6 months before the Vaudain's satellite house renovations began, it built into something you could bring before a court counsel with confidence. She laid it out for Emeric. He looked at the evidence for a long time. "Aldrich," he said quietly, not with anger. With something colder than anger, the particular grief of someone discovering that trust has been systematically violated. "He has been feeding them information for at least 2 years, she said, possibly longer. I appointed his position myself." A pause. "I knew his maker." She looked at him sideways. In the quiet of the study, at 4 in the morning, with the evidence between them on the desk, he looked less like a king and more like a man who had been carrying something enormous for a very long time. The distinction mattered to her in a way she had not anticipated. "It is not a reflection on your judgment," she said. "People decide to betray things they once believed in. It does not mean the thing they betrayed was wrong." He looked at her, not with surprise exactly, but with the expression of someone who had not expected to be offered that particular thought at that particular moment. "Your father," he said, used to say something similar, when I made decisions that turned out badly and could not let go of them. He quoted it to me when I was 17, and convinced that failing a single exam meant I would fail everything forever, she said. Something changed in his expression then. Very slightly. A softening at the corners that she had not seen before, a warmth that crept through the composed control of his face, the way light crept under a door. It was brief, and he did not remark on it, but she saw, and she thought he knew she saw it. "You should sleep," he said. "There is a guest suite prepared. There always is. Always. Your father stayed here often. I kept it ready from habit." He paused. "Stay. Tomorrow will be complicated, and I would prefer to have you here where I can ensure your safety." She should have said that she could manage her own safety, as she had been managing it for the last 8 hours. She was aware of this. She said, "All right," instead, and when she found the guest suite and lay down on a bed that was genuinely the most comfortable thing she had ever encountered, she thought about the way he had said 2 losses, and the way he had stood close in the study, and the way warmth had moved through his face when she spoke about her father, and she was asleep before she could finish the thought. He was already at his desk when she came down in the morning. 3 hours later, he had removed his jacket and rolled his sleeves up, which, on a vampire king of his particular brand of authority, was a more significant statement of informal ease than she could have explained precisely. He looked up when she entered. "Coffee is on the sideboard. There is also food. You should eat." She poured coffee and leaned against the sideboard and watched him work for a moment. "What are you doing?" "Preparing the case against Cassius for the emergency council session I have called for this afternoon." He set down his pen. "I need 12 court witnesses to the theft. Your testimony regarding what you found in the vault and recovered in Bratislava, and a clear presentation of the Aldrich evidence. If I do it correctly, the Vaudain court loses its counsel position and Cassius faces formal sanction under the blood law he tried to dissolve, using the Crown's recovery as evidence that the blood law is active and enforceable," she said. "Yes." He looked at her steadily. "Your testimony will be central. You are the one who was in Bratislava. You are the one who saw the crown displayed in the Vaudain house and recovered it. Without your account, I have physical evidence, but no witness to the act of theft in progress. I will testify, Celeste." He said her name the way he said everything, with a precision that suggested every syllable was deliberate. You understand what testifying before a full council session means. You will be formally on record as an active participant in Malkavian court affairs. Several courts will view that as a provocation. It makes you a target in ways that are significantly more formal than last night. She thought about this. She thought about her father, and the 30 years he had spent being a target in ways that were formal and otherwise. She thought about the Dawnbreaker Crown on its pedestal 40 feet below where they stood, and what its absence would have meant by this afternoon. I understand, she said. He held her gaze for a moment longer than strictly necessary. Then there is something I must tell you, he said, before the council session. Something you should know about your position here. He straightened behind the desk and set down the paper he was holding, and his expression was very serious. More serious than the Bratislava roads or the study at 4 in the morning. The Carmichael bloodline's service to this court has always been informal. Trusted, relied upon, deeply valued, but informal. Your father refused formal designation multiple times, preferring autonomy. I know, she said. He did not want to be owned by any court. He was wise. Emeric paused. I am about to ask you something he would have refused. I want you to consider it without his logic guiding you, because your situation is not his situation, and the world is not what it was when he made his choices. She set down her coffee. Ask. I want to formally designate you as the Malkavian court's human advocate, he said. It is a position that has existed in the old codes for 12 centuries, but has not been filled in over 400 years. It carries formal legal standing within all 13 courts. It makes you untouchable under the blood law as a designated court member. It gives you authority to act on behalf of this court that would retroactively legitimize everything you did last night. He paused. And it means Cassius Vordain and every other court that might see you as a soft target instead has to see you as mine. The last two words carried a weight that was entirely different from the legal and political explanation that preceded them. As mine, she was quiet for a long moment. You said my father refused. He valued his independence. I value mine too. I know. He did not look away. The position as I am offering it does not eliminate your independence. It grants you more leverage than you have ever had, more protection, more ability to do exactly what you did last night, but with the full weight of this court's legal standing behind you. A pause. And there is a personal reason I am asking, separate from the political one, which I am choosing to be honest about, rather than let you infer it incorrectly. She had been very carefully not looking at the way the morning light, filtered through the heavy curtains, caught the silver of his hair and the particular quality of his stillness. She looked now. I want you safe, he said simply. I want you here. Last night demonstrated a level of capability and loyalty, and sheer extraordinary nerve that I have encountered in very few people in 3 centuries. And I am aware that I am a vampire king asking a human woman to bind herself to a court that has cost her family enormously. And I am aware of every reason you should refuse. He stopped. But I am asking. The room was very quiet. She thought about the ways this could go wrong. She thought about what it meant to formalize a relationship with a world that operated on rules most humans never learned, and even fewer survived. She thought about the look on his face in the vault doorway when she had placed the crown in his hand. She thought about 2 losses. I have one condition, she said. Name it. I want the designation to include formal standing at every council session, not just emergency convening. I want a seat, not a title. Something shifted in his expression. The warmth again, more sustained this time, and beneath it, something that might have been admiration. Done. Then yes, she said. I accept. He looked at her for a moment as if confirming that she was real, that the conversation had happened the way it appeared to have happened. Then he nodded, the controlled, precise nod of a king who had just secured something important, and reached for the papers on his desk. But then he stopped. He turned back to her and said, in a voice that had fully set aside the formal register, Thank you, Celeste. She did not have a formal response prepared for that either. The council session that afternoon was the kind of event that reminded Celeste viscerally of why her father had found vampire courts both compelling and exhausting. The chamber beneath the Vienna estate held 16 people and enough accumulated historical weight to flatten a city block, 12 court representatives, and 4 senior Malkavian councillors, all of them old, all of them operating on timescales and with reference frames that made the morning's news cycle look like a breath held for a second. She gave her testimony clearly. She described the vault, the smell of nightshade oil, the drive to Bratislava, the fire alarm, the hall, the crown on its display stand, Cassius Vordain standing between her and the exit. She presented the Aldrich evidence with Emeric, walking the council through the cross-references and the financial record and the Luxembourg travel. Cassius was not present in the chamber, which was protocol for the accused. But his court representative, a thin ancient with copper-red eyes named Isolde, was present and made 3 attempts to discredit Celeste's testimony on the grounds that a human witness without formal court standing could not be considered reliable evidence for a criminal proceeding of this magnitude. The 3rd time, Emeric said, "The council will note that as of this morning, Celeste Carmichael holds the position of Malkavian Human Advocate, an office recognized under Article 7 of the original covenant, carrying full legal standing at all 13 courts. Her testimony is not only admissible, it is binding." Isolde went very still, the room went very still. Celeste felt 12 pairs of very old eyes turned toward her, and she met each of them without looking away. It took 4 hours. When it was done, the council had voted by a margin of 10-2 to sanction the Vordain court, suspend Cassius Vordain's council rights pending formal proceedings, and confirm the Dawnbreaker Crown's legal status as the binding instrument of the accord. Aldrich was remanded to court custody. The blood law was formally reaffirmed by unanimous council endorsement, 3 centuries of peace preserved. Afterward, the chamber emptied slowly. Court representatives departed with the particular measured dignity of people who would be on their phones to their respective territories within minutes. The councillors followed. The room became quiet. It was only Emeric and Celeste remaining, and the echo of everything that had happened in the last 18 hours settling around them. He looked at her across the long table.
"You held under pressures,"
he said. "Did you think I would not?" "No," he said. "I was certain you would. I simply wanted to say it." She moved around the table, not toward him specifically, but moving, because the chamber felt smaller now that it was empty, and the formality of the last 4 hours was releasing itself. She stood near the wall looking at an old map of the continent that was mounted there, the court territories marked in faded ink, boundaries and alliances from a world that was 3 centuries old and still fundamentally operative. "Cassius will not let this rest," she said. "No. But he will have to be very careful for the next decade at minimum. The council watching him now is not symbolic oversight. There are consequences defined." He came to stand beside her, looking at the map. "The more immediate problem is the 12 courts that watched a human woman testify today and realize that the Malkavian court is now operating with a human advocate for the first time in 4 centuries. Some will want to understand what that means. Some will want to test what it means. Then let them," she said. "I will not be managed by other courts' discomfort with the arrangement." He was close beside her. Close enough that the differential temperature she had noticed in the car was present again, the cool stillness of him against the warmth of her own body. She was aware of it in a way that had moved beyond the merely physical. "There is something I have been trying to determine how to say," he said. She turned her head to look at him. He was looking at the map. "I am 312 years old," he said. "In that time I have made hundreds of decisions about courts and politics and blood law and the preservation of something worth preserving. I am very accustomed to calculating the cost of everything." He paused. "I am not accustomed to finding a cost I would pay without calculation." She understood what he was saying. She understood it completely, and she felt it move through her with a clarity that was almost dizzying. "Emeric," she said quietly. He turned to look at her. At this distance, she could see the detail of his eyes, the grey-blue that shifted depending on what it held, and right now it held something that was not calculation at all. "I am aware," he said, "of the distance between what I am and what you are, of every practical and philosophical argument against what I am about to tell you. I have been aware of it since your father's funeral when you stood beside his grave and thanked me for attending with a composure that broke me in a way I had not been broken in longer than I can usefully measure." He stopped. I am telling you because you deserve the truth rather than the version of this where I maintain the proper distance and you eventually leave, and I allow it because it is the appropriate outcome." She said nothing. She was looking at him and she could feel her heartbeat in a way that was deliberate and specific. "I am in love with you," he said. "I have been for longer than last night made obvious, and last night made it very obvious." The room held its breath. She thought about every practical and philosophical argument against what she was about to say in return. She thought about 312 years, and what it meant to love someone across that kind of distance. She thought about her father's journals, which she had read 100 times, and about a particular passage she had read so many times she could recite it by heart. Her father had written, "The work of a life worth living is not the absence of risk. It is the presence of love that makes risk worth accepting." She was her father's daughter, she said. "I know. I have known since you said 2 losses in the car last night, and could not take it back." Something moved across his face that she had no precedent for. Something that was the oldest and most human expression she had ever seen on a vampire's features. The particular relief of a feeling finally returned. He reached up and touched her face, with the careful, deliberate precision of someone who understood the significance of every gesture. His hand was cool, and she leaned into it anyway. Or perhaps because of it. "I do not know how to do this carefully," he said. "Neither do I," she said. "Let us be reckless about it." He kissed her with the same quality of attention he gave to everything, full and precise and entirely present. She put her hands against his chest and felt the lack of heartbeat beneath her palms, the ancient stillness of him, and it did not feel like absence. It felt like depth. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Celeste had experienced in her 28 years. She moved formally into the estate, the guest suite transitioning into something that was obviously hers in every way except the name, until Emeric presented her with a key of her own and said simply, "This is your home if you want it to be," and she took the key and said, "I want it to be," without hesitation. She took on the role of human advocate with the same focused intensity she applied to everything, learning the legal frameworks and political structures of 13 courts, building relationships with the human allies and families that served each court, creating a network that had not existed in anything like its current form for 400 years. She was present at every council session. She became known, and then known as formidable, and then known as someone you did not attempt to manipulate without expecting to pay for it. Cassius Vordain's formal proceedings concluded 6 weeks after the Bratislava night. He lost his council position and was placed under a decade of monitored accord with stringent conditions. He was not destroyed, because destruction was not the blood law's preferred response to political betrayal, and because Emeric was, as Cassius himself had acknowledged, too careful and too genuinely honorable to use this moment for pure retaliation. Aldrich confessed fully under questioning and provided information that untangled a network of Vordain infiltration that had been running for 8 years. The information was disruptive and useful in equal measure, and the process of addressing it occupied months of work. 3 months after Bratislava, on a cold February evening, Celeste stood on the upper terrace of the Vienna estate, looking out over the city, her coffee in both hands against the chill. She heard the door behind her and felt the shift in the air before she heard his footsteps. Emeric came to stand beside her. He did not particularly feel the cold, but he had developed a habit of standing in places that were comfortable for her rather than irrelevant to him, which she found unreasonably endearing for a man 3 centuries old. "I have been thinking," he said. "Always dangerous." He almost smiled. It was a thing she had learned to recognize, the suggestion of amusement that his controlled expression allowed through in small measures. There is an old blood right in the covenant, older than the courts, older than the accord. Something from the original compact between the first ancient houses and the human families that allied with them. He paused. It is called the Sworn Witness Compact. Under its terms, a human designated by an ancient as their witness in all things, not just legal advocate but personal witness, becomes formally bound into the covenant in a way that is recognized by every court and every blood law ever written. She looked at him. "What does that mean practically?" "It means," he said carefully, "that you would be legally and ceremonially recognized as the one person to whom I am personally answerable." Not politically, personally, he paused. And in return, you would be protected under the oldest blood law that exists, a law older than any of the courts or their politics. Under that law, to harm you would be to harm me, in the eyes of every court on the continent. She was quiet for a moment. You have been working up to this for a while. I have been considering how to present it in a way that was an offer rather than a declaration, he said. It sounds like a marriage, she said. It is older than marriage, he said. But, yes, in the ways that matter, it is approximately that. She set down her coffee on the terrace rail and turned to look at him fully. The city spread out behind him, the lights of Vienna glittering in the cold air. And he was looking at her with everything visible in his face, the things he usually governed with such precision. The love, the hope, the weight of having lived 3 centuries towards this specific moment without knowing it. Emeric, she said. Yes, you are the most careful man I have ever met, she said. And you are not being careful right now. At all. No, he agreed. I am not. I find that I prefer it, she said. The ceremony was held 3 weeks later in the vaulted chamber below the estate with the 12 court representatives present, with Lena standing as Celeste's personal witness, with the Dawnbreaker Crown on its pedestal in the adjacent vault, and the ancient script of the original compact read aloud by the oldest of the court archivists, a vampire named Severin, who had not spoken formally in public for 100 years, and who spoke now, with the gravity to someone who understood that some moments required the weight of silence broken. The words of the compact were in 3 languages, the oldest layer in a script so antique that only a handful of people in the room could read it directly. But the translation carried through, and the chamber held it, and when Celeste gave her oath in her own language, clear and steady, and meant without reservation, she heard the resonance she had felt the night she touched the crown, old power, ancient and absolute and real. Emeric looked at her across the circle of light in which they stood, and she saw in his face the thing she had come to know in 3 months of close proximity and growing certainty. The truth that this ancient and extraordinary man had built 3 centuries of careful responsibility, and had waited, without knowing he was waiting, for someone to stand beside him the way she was standing now. Not behind him, not protected by him. Beside him, he took her hands, his cool fingers closing around hers, and when he spoke his oath, she felt it in the same deep register as the crown's resonance, a thing beyond language, a commitment so old and so genuine, it did not require any particular word to carry. The archivist completed the compact. The chamber was quiet. Then, with the formal proceeding done, and the court witnesses dispersing, Emeric leaned down and said against her hair, very quietly, not for the room but for her, 312 years, and I did not know that this was what I had been building toward. She turned her face up to look at him. You have it now. Yes, he said, I do. She kissed him in the vaulted chamber beneath Vienna with 12 vampire courts worth of politics settling around them, and the oldest blood law in existence, newly rewritten with both their names in it. And she thought of her father's journal and the passage she had memorized. And she understood it now, in a way that was no longer theoretical. The work of a life worth living was not the absence of risk. It was this, in the months that followed. The Malkavian court operated differently than it had in a very long time. Not because of the sworn witness compact alone, though that shifted balances in ways both subtle and significant. Not because of Celeste's formal standing as human advocate, though that reshaped every court's approach to the questions of human alliance that had been festering unaddressed for generations. It operated differently because the person at the center of it had changed in a way that 300 years of careful governance had not managed to change him, had opened something that caution and sovereignty and the long grief of outliving everyone he had ever known had kept closed for longer than most cities had existed. Emeric was still commanding. He was still regal, still the most dangerous person in any room he entered, still possessed of the absolute authority that 3 centuries of holding a fragile peace had built into him at a cellular level. He was still the vampire king that 12 other courts feared and respected and calibrated their every move against. But he laughed sometimes now, quietly, and with the slightly surprised quality of someone rediscovering a faculty they had not used in a very long time. Celeste had found, in the course of finding out who he was when he was not performing sovereignty, that he had a dry and unexpected sense of humor, that he had opinions about music that were extensive and occasionally absurd, that he read constantly and thought about what he read with a depth that was both the product of 3 centuries and the expression of a mind that had always been built for it. She had found that he noticed things about her specifically. The way he brought her coffee without being asked when she was deep in research. The way he rearranged his schedule around her presence without making it obvious that he had rearranged it. The way he positioned himself between her and any person or thing that might constitute a threat so smoothly and instinctively that it took her weeks to notice he was doing it consistently. She found that she did not mind. She was not a person who needed to be shielded from the world. But there was a distinction she had realized between protection that diminished and protection that said, simply, I will not let anything take you from me. She knew which kind his was. The Cassius situation had a coda. Several months after the formal proceedings, Cassius Vordain, stripped of his counsel position and operating under monitored accord, made a private approach to Celeste through an intermediary, requesting a meeting. She told Emeric about it immediately, because there were no secrets between them, and she had no intention of introducing any. Emeric's expression had been the particular controlled blankness that indicated he was suppressing a reaction, and she had said, I would like to hear what he has to say, with you present. A pause. Why? Because I think he wants to understand something, and if I can give him a version of understanding that makes him less likely to spend the next decade building toward another attempt, that is a political outcome worth pursuing. She paused. And because I am curious about him, he tried to have you killed. He made a calculation and then chose not to pursue it when it was blocked, she said. There is a difference. He looked at her for a long moment, and then the controlled blankness became something more complex, and he said, This is one of the things about you that I find simultaneously infuriating and absolutely extraordinary. Only one of the things. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. The meeting will happen here, on my terms. And I will be present for all of it. Agreed. Cassius Vordain came to Vienna 6 weeks later, under the protocols of the monitored accord, and sat across a table from the two of them in the same chamber where the council had heard Celeste's testimony. He was exactly as she remembered him from Bratislava, extraordinary looking, ancient, amber-eyed and utterly composed. He looked at her for a long time before speaking. I want to understand, he said finally, what you are. I am the Malkavian human advocate, she said, and the sworn witness of this court, both of which you already know. I know what you are called. I want to understand what you are. He paused. In 4 centuries of trying to dismantle the Malkavian dynasty, I have never encountered a human who made it harder to do so, not because of power or position, because of something else. He looked between her and Emeric. You changed him, and that changed the court, and that changed the entire calculation. Emeric said, in a tone that was very quiet and very absolute, Be careful about the direction of this conversation. Cassius looked at him. I am not criticizing it, he said. I am trying to learn from it. 400 years of believing that the Malkavian court's greatest structural weakness was its reliance on human alliance. I was wrong. It is its greatest strength, and I was too invested in my own framework to see it. He paused. I owe you an accounting for what I attempted. I am also, in my way, attempting to offer it. It was not an apology. Cassius Vordain was not the kind of person who apologized, but it was something, and Celeste recognized what it cost, a 4-century-old pride to produce it. She said, I understand the logic you were operating on. I disagree with every part of it, but I understand it. The question now is what you do with the framework you are rebuilding. He looked at her steadily. What would you recommend? Start by recognizing that human allies are not a liability to be managed. They are partners with perspectives that long-lived courts literally cannot have. You spend centuries in the same political structure, thinking the same thoughts. The humans around you are living in the current world in a way you are not. That is valuable if you let it be. The amber eyes held something she had not seen in them in Bratislava. Consideration. Real consideration. The meeting ended with nothing formally resolved and something informally shifted, and she thought that was probably the best outcome available. Afterward, in the corridor, Emeric had pulled her gently to a stop and looked at her with the warm gravity that she had come to recognize as the expression he used when he was feeling something he was still learning to express freely. "You do not cease to astonish me," he said. "You say that as though it surprises you." "Every time," he said, and kissed her forehead with a tenderness that somehow, every time, still made her heart do the specific thing that hearts do when they are entirely certain. A year after Bratislava, on a clear November evening that matched the anniversary of the night it all began, they stood together in the room that had originally been the formal reception of the Malkavian estate and was now, by an unspoken accumulation of choices, their room. The room that held her books beside his books and her research notes across from his council papers, and both of their lives in the same space because neither of them had made any particular decision to keep those lives separate. The city moved outside the tall windows. The lights of Vienna spread out toward the horizon. She was reading, he was working. The particular quiet of two people who are comfortable enough with each other to inhabit the same silence without needing to fill it. He looked up from his papers. "I have been thinking about the spring session. The Thornhaven Summit, yes. I want you to lead the Human Alliance portion of the agenda, not present it on behalf of the court. Lead it, draft it, shape it." She looked up from her book. In the year since her designation, she had grown the human advocate position into something the original covenant had envisioned, but never fully realized, a genuine bridge between the vampire courts and the human families and allies who served them, a formal structure with legal teeth and political standing. It had changed things, slowly and not without resistance, but genuinely. "I will need the full historical record of human alliance interactions going back 4 centuries, she said. "I will have it pulled. And I want to include at least 2 representatives from non-Malkavian aligned human families. If this is going to have any credibility as an institution rather than a court initiative, it needs voices that are not beholden to us specifically." He nodded, reasonable. She looked at him. "You agreed to that very quickly." "I trust your judgment," he said simply. She set her book down. 312 years old. And he said, "I trust your judgment," with the directness of someone who had always been this direct about the things that were most true. If only he could be trusted to let himself say them. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of his desk, which was technically completely unprofessional, and also something she did regularly, and he had never once suggested she stop. "Do you know what I think about?" she said. "When I think about the night I found the vault empty, tell me." "I think about the fact that I was terrified," she said. "Not of Cassius, not of the guards or the Vordain house. I was terrified that the thing my father had given his life to protect was going to come apart, and I was going to be the person watching it happen, and I think about how it felt to put the crown in your hand. Not relief, not pride. Something much quieter than either of those." She looked at him. It felt like arriving somewhere. He set down his pen. He put his hand over hers on the edge of the desk, cool and steady and entirely certain. "Yes," he said. "That is exactly what it felt like." She leaned forward and kissed him, her hand turning to hold his. And the November night gathered around the building with the patient intimacy of a city that had seen everything and held its own counsel about all of it. The Dawnbreaker Crown sat 40 feet below them on its pedestal in the vault, the ancient script of the Covenant engraved into its metal holding 3 centuries of fragile peace, and now a 4th begun. Outside, Vienna moved through its evening with no particular awareness of the vampire court beneath its streets, or the woman who had once driven through its outskirts toward a Bratislava house at 3 in the morning with a fire alarm and a sunlight charge, and her father's voice in her memory, and who had driven back with a crown in a bag and something she had not yet named changing in her chest. She knew what to name it now. She had known for some time. Emeric looked at her in the quiet of the room they shared, and in his face she could see all 312 years of him, the patience and the grief, and the long carrying of enormous things. And beneath all of it, the man who had been built for exactly this kind of love, and had simply not had anyone to give it to until a woman with a flashlight and a copper wire detector and her father's voices walked into the oldest conflict in vampire world, and refused to be managed by the scale of it. "Stay," he said as he had said the morning after Bratislava. I am staying, she said, as she had said then, and meant it then, and meant it now with the full weight of everything that had happened in the year between. She was her father's daughter. She understood what it meant to give your life to something worth giving it to, and she had found, against every probability, something worth every single piece of the risk. The snow that had been threatening all week began to fall outside the tall windows, drifting through the Vienna night, covering the city in a quiet that would last until morning. Inside, the lights were warm and the room held two people, and everything they had built together, the legal structures and the political frameworks and the ancient compact, with both their names in it, and also the simpler things, the books beside books, the coffee brought without asking, the silence that did not need to be filled. All of it together amounting to something the oldest blood laws in the world had a word for home.